Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Andy Steele, the operations manager here at AE 911 Truth, and we are bringing you another great webinars. Of course, this is a continuing series we're doing all the time with the volunteers of Project Due Diligence, which is bringing presentations like these to the engineering community, to the branches of professional organizations all over the country. And we got a very exciting one here today. Something that is long overdue. It involves a video that NIST put out in 2009. Well, this guest, this presenter, is going to be sinking his teeth into it and debunking it left and right. His name is Gene Johnson. He is a Project Due Diligence volunteer. He has a BSME and 30 plus years experience as a construction and mining engineer, designing and working with heavy machinery and open pit mining where explosives are used. He's a signatory to AE 911 Truth's petition, of course, calling for a new investigation into the destruction of the three towers that fell in New York on September 11th. And he's going to be going over that 2009 video. Like I said before, it's long overdue. So let me go ahead and put him in here. But before I do that, actually, let me just remind everybody that we will take your questions, as always, at the end of this presentation. Easiest way to have me see your question, because there's a lot of other stuff that gets put in these boxes, is to just write question before you write what the actual question is and type it into the YouTube chat for this broadcast, or you can put it in the Facebook comments as well. And then I'll see it and we'll ask Gene about it and he'll give you a good answer. So put them in. Gene, you are on the air and the show is all yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Andy. The architects and engineers were established in 2006 by Richard Gage, an architect. And today we have over 3,600 degree certified architects and engineers from all over the world demanding a new independent investigation into the collapse of the three World Trade Center buildings, the Twin Towers and Building 7. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was given the responsibility to determine the cause of failure for those buildings. NIST is a part of the Commerce and Executive Branch. NIST came out with a 10,000-page report in 2005 on the collapse of the Twin Towers and a 1,000-page report in 2008 on Building 7. Neither of those reports have ever been properly peer-reviewed until now. The A&E engineers have studied those reports and have found serious errors and omissions. They've put that information into a PowerPoint slide format, and that's being shown to engineering societies all over the world with A&E volunteers. It's called Project Due Diligence. After NIST published their report in 2008, they produced a short video. It was titled, "Why the Building World Trade Center 7 Fell." It was put on YouTube in early 2009, and it's had over 2.3 million views. So we're going to go through that today because there's some really interesting things to talk about. But before we do that, I want to spend some time on Building 7. I'm pretty sure you've all seen this this layout of where 7 was. It's in the little blue box up at the top. It's part of the 7 building complex of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. 7 sits about 350 feet north of 1, which is the North Tower. And down at the bottom, we have Building 2, which is the South Tower. Here's a better layout showing the Twin Towers in relation to Building 7. And Building 7 looks small because it's up against 110 stories. But 7 is a huge building by itself. It's got a footprint about the size of a football field. The footprint on the Twin Towers is about an acre. They're 200 by 200 approximately. The Building 7 is shaped like a trapezoid. The short side of the trapezoid is facing the North Tower. The South Tower was hit at 8:45. The North Tower was hit at 9:05. The South Tower collapsed at 9:58. The North Tower collapsed at 10:28. So they both collapsed within about 80 or 90 minutes of being hit. Now those towers were over a quarter of a mile tall, 1,300 feet or more. Now the interesting thing about all three of the buildings is they came straight down. They were all unique in the fact that they collapsed in about the same way. Had those Twin Towers tipped over, you'd had considerable more collateral damage surrounding the area in Lower Manhattan. Our Building 7 never collapsed until 5:20 in the afternoon. Approximately 7 hours after the fall of the towers, Building 7, not hit by a plane, collapsed and turned into this 5-story rubble pile in 7 seconds. It was in free fall for 2.3 seconds. Now that free fall and the 7 seconds, we're going to talk about that after this introduction video.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when the building was deliberately destroyed by all planes dying to knock down.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word. We're gonna have to bring it down.
We heard this sound that sounded like clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shockwave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caved out. We followed after that, and saw the building crash away to the ground.
And it turned in time to see what looked like a scraper implosion. Looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsed down on itself.
It just pancaked.
Interesting thing that happened at the site. This is Lower Manhattan, and BBC reporter is being filmed reporting that the Building 7 has already collapsed, and the camera has the Building 7 in the background over her left shoulder. So she's saying it's collapsed, and they can see on the screen that it hasn't collapsed yet. So that means that people knew ahead of time that building was going to collapse, and no building has ever collapsed before because of fire. The interesting thing about this is the BBC was sued for false reporting by a local citizen, and they lost the case. I mentioned earlier that it collapsed in 7 seconds, and it was in free fall for a little over 2 seconds. And I want to show you what that means, because this is what the building looked like and the amount of structural steel that was inside it. And I want you, when we look through these pictures, just think about what had to happen to get it to fall in 7 seconds. There's a worker right here to give you an idea of the scale. The building, like I say, was a trapezoid. It has an outer series of columns and an inner series of columns. You actually have a box, an inner box, inside of an outer box. And this shows you the huge amount of area available for office space per floor. It was over an acre office space per floor. But there are 58 columns on the perimeter and 24 on the center, and we're going to talk about those columns in a little bit. But here's a picture showing them laying floor. It goes up floor by floor, and you see the outer columns and the inner columns. And again, once again, here's one of the workers, give you an idea of the scale. We're back to columns now. There's 82 columns, and these columns, what you're looking at here is the fireproofing that's sprayed over the top of the columns, and all of the structural steel inside the building had been sprayed with this fireproofing. But these columns weigh 730 pounds a foot, and the building's 610 feet tall, and there's 82 of them. So if you just take the number of columns times 730 pounds a foot times 610 feet, you got 36.5 million pounds of just columns. And that all has to get taken away so it falls in 7 seconds. And in addition to the standard column, you have some columns that are reinforced with 2-inch plate. 2-inch plate that's welded to the side of the flanges of the column, 26 inches wide, so that it overlaps the 22-inch column, 22-inch I-beam, and that's on each side. So when you add these plates to this column, the weight per foot is over 1,000 pounds. So you cut a section of 1 foot off of this column, you put it in your half-ton pickup, and you've overloaded that pickup with just 1 foot of this column. And I'm just stressing the massiveness of the building to show how unbelievable it is that it collapsed in 7 seconds. Very side of the building, you can see the different columns. These are the standard columns, and here's a box column and another box column. And the boxes, the fabricated reinforced columns were used in areas of high load areas. So yeah, they decided they needed a little bit of extra safety factor in some areas, so they reinforced those columns. Once again, just the massiveness of the structure. And this is the size of a football field, 610 feet tall. I get a little better picture of this guy right here. Just look how massive that piece of steel is. There it is again. Just enormous. Here's a picture of the floor looking from the east to the west. And it's from the northeast corner. And we're going to get back to the northeast corner because that's when we start talking about what the NIST what NIST says the failure, how the failure occurred. We're going to be focusing on the northeast corner, but in this way you can see the floor space. It's a 47,000 square foot of rentable floor space, more than 1 acre, and you've got the concrete on this is 4 inches of poured concrete. And looking at the ceiling, you can see the concrete is poured on this steel pan, 4 inches of it. And there's 47 floors, and 4 inches every floor, you've got over 15 feet of concrete. So just think of a football field with a 15-foot fence around it, and just fill that up to the top of the fence, and you have the amount of concrete that's in this building. And when we get a little farther into the conversation about what NIST says happened, we're going to be looking at these floor beams connected to this girder. Now, early in 2009, NIST posted a video saying why the building World Trade Center 7 failed. And like I said, it had over 2.3 million views. And I'm going to play this video, then we're going to go through it and talk about it.
Gene, I'm just going to jump in and let you know that we're not hearing the audio on it. So maybe you want to turn up the speaker and start it over again.
Okay.
No, we're still not hearing the audio. Perhaps on the speaker that's feeding, that's attached to your computer, feeding into the microphone. Maybe you could tune that one up.
No, I just have the sound off of the video. I'm not sure how to make that louder.
All right. Do you have a speaker that's feeding that plays audio for you on your computer?
No, it's just the computer itself, the audio.
All right. Is there any way to turn up the volume on the computer?
No, I got it all. Well, let me see. Maybe I can. There. All right.
All right. While he's doing that, that is live television, folks. So we're going to have some glitches, and we are. I heard that. I got these earbuds in, and it goes right through my brain here.
Let's try it again. I've got it all the way to the top now.
I never thought I'd be trying to hear Shyam Sunder speak. No, I'm still not hearing any audio off of that. So unfortunately, it seems like we're having problems with playing the particular video, or at least not playing it, but actually hearing it. It is a 3-minute video. If we can't get the audio to come up, perhaps you can give our audience a general gist of what they are talking about and what you'll be addressing later on in the presentation.
Yeah, let's do that. I don't really need the video because I take sections out of the video and I've narrated it. So let's just avoid let's not go with the video. Sorry about that. All right, I want to introduce you to Dr. Shyam Sunder because he's the key person in this video. He's the NIST World Trade Center lead investigator for the buildings. And here's what he says in the video. He says the NIST team found no evidence that explosives were involved in the collapse. Our analysis showed that even the smallest explosive charge that was capable of bringing down the critical column in the building, had it occurred, we would have seen sound levels of 120 to 130 decibels about a half a mile away. That would have been an incredibly loud sound, and that sound was not picked up by any of the videos or witnesses that we have talked to. So, what did he just say? He said NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, concluded there weren't explosives because nobody heard sound levels of 120. So is Dr. Sunder ignoring the scientific method of research? That method doesn't draw conclusions based on hearsay. The scientific method is a process of objectively establishing facts through testing and experimentation. The basic process involves making an observation, forming a hypothesis, making a prediction, conducting an experiment, and finally analyzing the results. It involves more than asking people if they heard sound levels of 120 decibels. NIST was asked by A&E if they investigated for explosives in the World Trade Center buildings, and they said that they did not. Now, in regard to his comment that nobody heard explosives, Barry Jennings, who was a New York City employee, was in Building 7 the morning of 9/11. And here are 3 excerpts from his interview. He said there was an explosion and the landing gave way. I was there hanging and I had to climb back up and I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. All this time, I'm hearing all kinds of explosions. And then he said, and the firefighter who took us down kept saying, do not look down. I kept saying, why? We were stepping over people. And you know when you can feel when you are stepping over people. And then he said, this huge police officer came over to me and said, you have to run. I said, I can't. My knees are swollen. He said, you have to get on your knees and crawl because we have reports of more explosions. An early WTC7 interview said that I want to translate to you a story that another man told me. He was near the building, Building 7. He was on the lobby level near the shopping area, and the elevator door blew open, and when the door opened, there was a man on fire inside. That's the kind of tragedy we're talking about here. And here was somebody that was interviewed on the street. He said, he's talking about the building, the South Tower now, which collapsed first. He said a big explosion happened. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. And then he said about 10 minutes later, the second building went off. He's talking about the North Tower. And whoever was interviewing him said, did you see it? He said, yes, I saw it. It just blew up, a big explosion. People started running and there was chaos, people jumping out. You could tell they were still alive because they were flailing around. It was just horrible. Now, one of the things that the A&E group did is that they collected 36 reports made by reporters from the different networks. And this is their first response in regard to what they were seeing on that day. And each one of these names has a link to the person's report. And you can go to the A&E website, and if you really want to get a flavor of what was going on that day, just listen to these various reports. I'll play a couple here. I'm not sure if we'll be able to hear it, though. And it's because we have a also. Did you get the audio?
I did hear it for a moment, so go ahead and let it play. It seems to be frozen. Well, now I'm not hearing it. All right. Well, I'm not hearing it. Maybe our wonderful audience can let us know if they are hearing it or not. I don't. They probably aren't. I'm not. However, maybe you can summarize what they say.
Yeah, here's the transcription. So if you go to the A&E website, you'll see this 36 different comments on actual people that were actually on the site. But here's one of the things he said. He told me shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were there. And that basically he received word of a possibility of a secondary device. That is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit, the first crash that took place, he said there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact, he thinks may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told about, told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. But the bottom line is that according to the chief of safety of New York City, he says that he probably lost a great many men in those secondary explosions, and that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people in those two towers when the explosion took place. So if you go once again, you can see these different newscasters. It gives you both the video and the transcription of what the video was. And if you really want to get a flavor of what happened that day, you've got a history here of 36 newscasters from all the different news sites explaining to you what they saw. So it's valuable historical information. And here's the address. You go to A&E homepage, go to evidence, technical articles, and then articles by A&E Truth. And down here you have the 36 reporters. That's where you can go to get it. But in addition to that, if you talk to the firefighters, somebody's written a book and has talked to 118 firefighters. They report the same thing. This one was from the South Tower. I heard 3 explosions, and then we heard a groaning and a grinding, and the Tower 2 started to come down. And this is about the North Tower. I said, I heard 3 loud explosions. I look up, and the North Tower is coming down. It's interesting that they noted that there are 3 explosions in both towers. Okay, moving back to the video. The video says NIST used detailed data describing the building and its content to create the most complex computer simulation of a structure collapse ever made. And this is the NIST finite element progressive collapse model. And the odd thing about it is that their model doesn't look anything like the video of the building collapsing. Here you can see a comparison of the two side by side. The NIST model stops the collapse right about there and their model doesn't collapse to the bottom like the actual video does. This is if you're standing north, looking at the north side of the of Building 7. This is what the NIST model looks like. Complete twisted out of shape, where you don't see that on the actual video. This is the view from the north. Okay, here we get another very controversial quote from Dr. Sunder. He said, "The World Trade Center collapsed because of fires. We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered, which is a fire-induced progressive collapse. In fact, we have shown for the first time that fire can induce a progressive collapse." Then, in addition to what he just said, but the commentators in the video, one of the commentators said, "No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story Building 7, according to a 3-year comprehensive building and fire safety investigation just completed by NIST." So he's saying that it's a progressive collapse, which a progressive collapse would mean that one event happened which created something like a series of dominoes, ultimately causing in this case, a collapse of the building. But how could that happen in 7 seconds? You've got a building the size of a football field. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that was done by the University of Alaska at Fairbanks, where they did a 4-year study looking at what could have caused Building 7 to collapse and do computer simulations to duplicate that collapse. Now, and this is just a pictorial showing high-rise buildings that have been on fire in the past. You've got several of them, 3 here and 2 over here. None of those buildings collapsed. And the takeaway here is that looks like Building 7 didn't have hardly any fire, and yet it did collapse because of fire, according to NIST. And again, this comes from the video. It's the NIST explanation of how the collapse started and progressed. Now, this is kind of word salad, so I won't read it all. I'm just going to show you, kind of point out the high points. It shows that heat from fires expanded long support beams, causing connections and floors to fail. Eventually, column 79 is going to buckle, and then the entire vertical progression takes place. A chain reaction then caused other interior columns to fail. The outside shell of the building fell, and you had total collapse of the building. Now, that was supposed to happen, according to the video we saw of the building collapsing. That all had to happen in 7 seconds, which was just impossible. And some people think the NIST explanation is a Rube Goldberg process. And Rube Goldberg was a cartoonist years ago who created very interesting articles, pictorials of different things happening in a series to create a very simple outcome. In this case, you're going to see the shoe falls down and staples these papers together. However, NIST was given an impossible task. They had to explain the building collapse without mentioning the word explosives. Okay, NIST claims that the initiation was heat from fires expanding long support beams, causing connections and floors to fail. So these are the beams, the floor beams. We're on the 12th floor. This says there's a huge fire on the 12th floor that's heating up these floor beams to 600 degrees. This is the girder these floor beams are supposed to push off of this column 79, and the girder heats up to 500 degrees C. The column heats up to 300 degrees C. And when these floor beams get heated up to 600 degrees, they grow horizontally because of the thermal expansion associated with steel. When steel heats up, it becomes larger, and in this case, longer. And here's a close-up showing how the girder is attached to the column. It has 4 bolts on top and the bottom, 2 bolts on the bottom, 2 bolts on top, 4 bolts. Plus, it's sitting on a seat. And in order for these floor beams to push it off of its seat, it would have to break the bolts and overcome the sliding friction associated with the weight of this girder sitting on that seat. And this girder is supporting the whole floor area, so there's a huge amount of weight associated with that sliding friction. So what NIST says is happening is this is the northeast corner of 413, and these 5 floor beams heat up to 600 degrees. They push against this girder and break it loose from its column. When that happens, the floor falls down. It breaks the floor below it loose, and that floor falls down. And now, after several of these cascading falling floors, you have column 79 unsupported laterally, and it buckles. And when column 79 buckles, there's a sequence of events where the rest of the columns fail, the other 81 columns, and the building falls down. So that's the NIST progressive collapse theory. Okay, could that have happened? So you have to answer 2 questions. How far do you need to push the girder before it falls off its seat? Because that has to happen if the NIST's argument is true. And the next question is, how far would the floor beams expand horizontally at 600 degrees C? So from the NIST report, NIST says a girder was considered to have lost vertical support when its web was no longer supported by the bearing seat. The bearing seat at column 79 was 11 inches wide. Thus, when the girder end at column 79 had been pushed laterally at least 5.5 inches, it was no longer supported by the bearing seat. And what they're talking about here is that this is the girder. It's an I-beam. It has the flange on top and the web in the middle, and it's sitting on this seat. And this blue arrow, these 2 blue arrows, are the floor beams being thermally expanded, pushing against the web, pushing against the girder, and breaking these 4 bolts, 2 bolts at the top, 2 bolts at the bottom, overcoming the static friction so that the web of the girder reaches the edge of the seat. And once it does that, the girder is going to fall off the seat. So to answer the first question, you have to have beams, 53-foot long 4 beams, when they're the 2 questions, and girder would fall off of its seat because it's being pushed far enough, and the building would collapse. So the NIST building collapse initiation would start. Except the A&E engineers discovered that the construction drawing shows that the girder bearing seat was actually 12 inches wide, which NIST later admitted to and issued an erratum. So now that means the girder has to be pushed 6 inches. And we said that the thermal expansion of the girder is only 5.517. So the thermal expansion now is not enough to push that girder off of its seat. So the building collapse would not be initiated. So that by itself says that the NIST theory of collapse, progressive collapse, could not have happened. But it doesn't stop there. There's more information to look at. Because in those 53-foot long floor beams, when you heat them up, they're supported on each end. So that's a span of 53 feet without support. When you heat that up to 600 degrees, there's going to be a certain amount of sag. And NIST does not take that into account. It's not very much. It's about 1/8 of an inch, but it shortens the horizontal length. And another thing that NIST ignored were web stiffeners that add strength to the girder web. So this is from the Frankel steel construction drawing. It shows these side plates that are welded to the end of the girder. They're 5 inches wide, 18 inches long, 3/4 of an inch thick, and they're welded to the one welded to each side of the web and to the flange. And if you go to the NIST report and look at their drawing, those stiffeners are not included. We know they're there because here's a picture of them. Now, when you put the stiffeners on the end of the girder, you can see, this is from the University of Alaska report. They looked at this in detail with their computer modeling, and they show that you can push the girder past the edge of the seat without it collapsing. And another thing was that it turns out, I talked to you earlier about column 79 having a fabricated column where a 2-inch by 26-inch wide plate, 2-inch thick, 26 inches wide plate is welded to the flanges of the column. Turns out that column 79, the one that NIST chose to demonstrate their collapse theory, turns out that was one that had the fabricated column. And the thing that's important here is that the column extends beyond the edge of the flange. So when the floor beams heated up to 600 degrees, the girder heated up to 500 degrees, and it had thermal expansion and elongation. It pushed it into the side of column 79, so that now it's trapped behind the side plate. So when these floor beams push against the girder here, it can't push it off of the column because it's trapped behind that side plate. And finally, NIST considered the outside wall of the floor beams to be rigid. What they're showing here is that the expansion of these floor beams against this girder is only in one direction. You can see the arrow here. However, according to Isaac Newton, you get an opposite reaction to every action. So this force there is a certain amount of force against this outside wall. So you would expect to see some deformation, which would reduce the overall length of the floor beams against the girder. So in order for the NIST theory to work, NIST made some assumptions. They assumed that the fireproof floor beams were heated to 600 degrees, which is really a stretch, because the floor beams were sprayed with fireproofing, and in order to get those 53-foot long floor beams heated to 600 degrees would take a considerable fire that may not have been available. They assumed that the seat the girder rested on was 11 inches. And then they agreed later that it was 12 inches. But they didn't change their theory of failure. There was no sag in they assumed there was no sag in the 53-foot long beams. They assumed the outside wall was fixed and that there were no girder web stiffeners, and that the thermally elongated girder did not become trapped behind the column side plates. But the bottom line is that all of these things question whether or not the NIST theory of girder falling off column 79 could have ever happened to initiate the progressive failure. I mentioned earlier that there was a research study done by the University of Alaska at Fairbanks in regard to modeling the collapse of World Trade Center 7. It was done by Professor Leroy Halsey, who was the chairman of the Civil Engineering Department. And he's a forensic structure engineer, and he and his teams put together an analysis of how the building fell and created the model that duplicated the actual video collapse. So the principal conclusion of their study is that fire did not cause the collapse of Building 7, contrary to conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. And their secondary conclusion is that it's not a progressive collapse, but a global collapse. And the simultaneous failure of all core columns over 8 stories followed 1.3 seconds later by the simultaneous failure of all exterior columns, produces almost exactly the behavior observed in videos of the collapse. So they modeled the building. They put all of the dimensions, all of the structure, and they put it all into the computer so that they had a duplicate of what the actual building was. And then they experimented with different scenarios to show how the building collapsed and compared with the videos. And what they're saying is that it had to have all of the columns removed for 8 floors. Now, when we saw the building collapse, we saw it come down in 7 seconds, and there was 2.3 seconds of free fall. So in order for free fall to happen, you have to remove all of the structure in a certain section of the building for it to fall through that area and not have any resistance. And that's exactly what the University of Alaska is saying here, is that all of the columns had been removed out of 8 stories. So here's another comment from the video. It says, falling debris from Tower 1 started fires on 10 floors in Building 7. Here's a pictorial showing the damage from Building 7, the North Tower that hit Building 7. And NIST says that this damage didn't have anything to do with their collapse theory. One one of the things about the fire is that the fires could have been easily put out by the fire department, but the firemen were told not to go into the fire. If you look at it, it would have been an easy thing to put out by the firemen. And I really recommend this. It's a documentary that the firefighters for 9/11 Truth put out. It's well worth the watch. And they talk about fire physics and building design, and they explain why they continue to go into high-rise fires without a fear of sudden and complete building failure. Because after the Twin Towers and Building 7, after those collapsed because of fires, according to NIST, the firefighters would certainly be concerned. And then from back to the commentator of the video, the team's report also calls for stronger codes, standards, practices, so that other buildings don't suffer the same fate. As a rebuttal, as far as we know, no structure codes have ever been changed as a result of the NIST report. Now, this doesn't need to have audio, but I came across this video showing what was going on. This is a CBS News cameraman who was walking through the floor, walking through Building 7 at 10:10. Now, at 10:10, the South Tower had already collapsed, but the North Tower hadn't collapsed yet. So let's just go through a little bit of this video, and it'll give you a flavor what the area looked like at that time frame. So what we're seeing here is this is all the South Tower. Now, there's a lot of videos like this showing this actual on the site at the time of various times of the collapses of the different buildings on the A&E website. So if you do a little bit of searching on the website, you'll see videos like this if you're interested. As far as I'm concerned, this is pretty interesting data. Real time, what was going on at the buildings and what the first responders had to deal with. Right there, right here, you can see the cameraman being reflected in the windows. Now you can probably say that this kind of damage shouldn't be there from the South Tower. You shouldn't have had this kind of it's kind of hidden back underneath the area, so you wouldn't expect broken windows like that. I can kind of go a little bit forward here. There's some more damage inside of 7. Now, nothing should be inside the building. This at 10, World Trade Center, the South building had already collapsed, but not the North building. So this is far enough away from the South building. So all of this stuff shouldn't really be inside of 7. Now you've got trash and stuff inside, but all those windows are still intact. I don't know if you're interested in this kind of information. This is available, valuable. Okay, Andy, that's a wrap.
All right. Thank you, Gene. And thank you, everybody, for your great comments and questions. And we're going to have a few of them. Now, bear with me here because they logged me out of my email, which is how I send these to myself. So let's see if we can get that up again. Okay. So I guess one of the first questions that I know off the top of my head, somebody was asking about the fire sprinklers, the fire sprinkler system in World Trade Center 7, and if there has been any kind of inquiry into that. And I will say, another commenter mentioned this. There's an excellent film out there called Calling Out Bravo 7, where they do get into this, and they make a very convincing argument that the sprinkler systems were actually working on that day. They have videos of the firefighters operating hoses, putting out fires in the other buildings. They even have a video, I believe, in there of the sprinklers working in the lower floors of World Trade Center 7. Of course, NIST claims that they were not working, and they say that the unfought fires were what led to this entire event with the girder, the beams pushing the girder off of its seat and starting the whole a series of events that brought World Trade Center 7 down. So anybody that is interested in the fire sprinkler issue, definitely check it out. It's called Calling Out Bravo 7. Do you have any comments about that, Gene?
Yeah, I just put the link for that up where you should be able to see that. Or I guess you dropped me off.
No, I see you right there. Okay, so I wasn't even looking at the screen, but yeah, Calling Out Bravo 7. There it is. So very good film, definitely worth checking out. And it's a lot of new information. A lot of times when you watch films about the World Trade Center evidence, it kind of rehashes a lot of the same stuff and borrows from other films, but this has got a lot of original content and does cover that. All right, so the first question says, is controlled demolition the only alternative to the NIST model of the collapse, or are there other possibilities for a fire-caused collapse?
Well, I don't think so, because NIST would have, they struggled for 3 years to try to come up with a reason that the building 7 collapsed without using explosives. And the only thing they could come up with was what they came up with. And that was one of the columns had to become laterally unsupported. And that happened when the girders fell off of it. And when that happened, and then the collapse sequence started. So I'm sure if in 3 years, if there was another explanation, they would have probably had, or another better explanation, they would have probably advertised that one.
Yeah, their explanation is so flimsy that if they had something better, they would have ran with it, no doubt. Now, the next question asks, my impression is that the WTC7 collapsed, as WTC7 collapsed, the majority of the windows were intact and saw no sign of them exploding outwards and no explosive flashes. Is that correct?
I can't really say one way or another on that. I haven't watched all the videos, so I can't really say that that's correct or not.
Well, I've watched a lot of videos of it. I can say, number one, the fact that the windows stayed pretty much intact until right when the building came down is evidence of controlled demolition. Now, NIST wants to claim that the interior of the building fell first and then the exterior, and that's why it looks like it's coming down as a single unit. This is how they brush off these explanations or these presentations that we give. But if there was the interior falling first, you would have seen massive warpage on the outside. You would have seen breakage of windows. The fact that they stayed intact until the very end when the building comes down actually is in our favor of our argument. So thank you for that contribution to that supporter of ours.
One comment I'd make on that is that if the building came down with the method that was described by NIST, it probably would have tipped over and not come straight down.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's so many problems. The straight down symmetrical collapse of this building, and I use the word collapse very loosely, is a smoking gun in itself. It's the thing that triggers people and makes them question, did fire really bring this building down? Because anytime you watch a fire, especially in steel frame high rises, they do not come down in this way. And there's so many examples. We've been pointing them out since the beginning of AE 9/11 Truth in the early days of these steel frame high rises catching fire. They light up like a torch in the night. Sometimes they can even use the buildings still after some renovations, but they do not collapse in this way. There might be pieces here and there that come down, but overall the building remains standing. So right there, just from watching it, you don't even need a scientific explanation, even though we provide them, to know that there's a problem with the story that we're being given. All right. Next question is not really about the presentation. It's asking if we've ever sent Mick West a debate challenge. My best answer to that is probably there. We have sent a lot of debate challenges to a lot of people over the years, and I would imagine Mick West has been one of them. We're always willing to debate anyone at any time on this issue. So anyone wants to step up and do it, certainly we'll be happy to meet them. So that's my answer. Do you have anything to comment on that, Gene?
Nothing really to add. No, I'm good.
All right. So it's question for any. Oh, this is about the calling out Bravo 7. So yeah, definitely check out that film. This is the final question. Can you put the 5-minute video of Leroy Halsey on YouTube that some PBS channels showed? My 2 PBS channels on my TV did not ever show it. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if that is on our YouTube channel or if we have access to that. I know that what they're talking about is the movie 7. There was a small segment that was shown on PBS called Spotlight on 7 that just aired. It was some kind of segment that would play in between programs. So this was included in the rotation. So, I mean, I can certainly look for it, and we may have access to that. It's basically a shortened down version of the film 7. But if you want to get a more in-depth look at the film 7, I would just watch the film 7 out there, which is available. And of course, we sell the DVDs in our store, so that'll be more in depth. The 5-minute segment is just 5 minutes cut from that movie. Any comments about any of these questions, Gene, or anything to add before we close it up?
No, I'm just sorry we didn't have the audio. I don't understand why that. You and I checked that before the presentation.
Let me tell you something, folks. There are some. I don't know if I was the type of person that didn't believe what they were told all the time, I would think that there may be certain forces that don't want this information out there, because we run into a lot of technical glitches, even though we test and retest and test over again. It's just part of the game, and we roll with the punches here. So I'm sorry we couldn't play that audio, but the video that was being critiqued out there or on this presentation is out there on NIST's website. And it's and you can find it. It's How the Building Fell, WTC7. It's right on NIST's YouTube channel. So watch it. It's only 3 minutes, and then you compare it to what's being discussed here, and you can see that their story is full of holes. So, folks, yes, we're gonna try to get on top of all these technical problems. Sometimes it is beyond our control. We can do everything that you can to stop it. Sometimes you can do everything right and still have things go wrong, and that is just life. But I think we got an excellent presentation out of it today regardless. So thank you, and help us out, help us keep this information flowing. There's people like Gene, there's people like other engineers that are going to the grassroots of the engineering community. And, what we're finding out is that these engineers agree with us. For whatever reason, they're staying silent, but they're not staying so silent anymore. They want to speak out. They want to be able to change the leadership of the ASCE. And I'm going to tell you what, with NIST relying on the ASCE to back up their reports saying, oh, the ASCE stands by our reports, you pull the legs out from under them by changing the leadership of the ASCE, causing it to reconsider its support of the NIST reports. You're going to take that right out of NIST's arsenal. They're going to have nothing to stand on. So please consider supporting us. Sign up for membership. We've got some cool media projects, just little goodies that you can get as a result for signing up at certain tiers. Sort of as just our thank you to you, keeping you engaged. And of course, the major work is the work like this, bringing this information to the people that need to see it. So for my part, this is Andy Steele with Gene Johnson saying we'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great afternoon, folks.